Ladies and gentlemen, there comes a moment in history when silence is no longer an option, when words cut deeper than any weapon, and when diplomacy tears apart the false sense of comfort. Today we stand at such a turning point. All boundaries have been crossed. In a calm yet firm voice, India's External Affairs Minister Dr. S. Jaishankar delivered remarks that echoed across Washington's power corridors. It was not only about what he spoke, it was also about the manner in which he expressed it. Direct, unapologetic, and disturbing for those who believed India would always remain in the background of global politics. For decades, the United States has carried the privilege of shaping the narrative of who leads, who obeys, and who must compromise. But today, India has shown clearly that it will no longer be lectured, cornered, or forced into submission. Jaishankar's words were far more than diplomatic talk. They were a declaration of independence in foreign policy, a demand for multipolarity, and a sharp reminder that the modern world is not America's chessboard anymore. The response was shock, doubt, and unease among analysts who once thought India's rise would remain under limits. But tonight, those limits are gone. This is not arrogance but confidence. It is the rightful stand of a nation of 1.4 billion people, a civilization that endured centuries of exploitation now rising with determination and clarity of purpose. Jaishankar's message could not be mistaken. Respect is not for sale, sovereignty cannot be bargained, and partnership must be equal or it is nothing at all. India's firm stand, revealed through Jaishankar's latest remarks, is more than one moment in diplomacy. It represents a major turning point in how New Delhi presents itself internationally, and it is sending a bold signal across world capitals that India will no longer accept being treated as a junior ally or a minor player in big decisions. For decades, India carefully balanced relations with major powers while securing its own needs. But its language often carried a soft tone, leaving room for different interpretations. This time the words were clear, direct, and steady. They were not about hostility, but about conviction, and they have unsettled those who assumed India would forever follow the signals of stronger powers, particularly the United States. The courage we now see comes from India's growing economic and strategic weight. With over 1.4 billion citizens, a fast-growing economy, and a military that commands global respect, India has reached a point where hesitation no longer helps. Jaishankar's words reflect this change with precision. India will now decide independently, using its own judgment, and it will not surrender to outside pressure disguised as friendship. For Americans used to allies quietly adjusting to Washington's wishes, this blunt honesty feels like a break from tradition. But for India, it is simply the natural step of a nation reclaiming its own authority. The background of this strong position matters. The post-Cold War order was mostly shaped by U.S. choices, and many countries adjusted themselves to that dominance. But over time, India saw the limits of such adjustment. Whether it was pressure to buy specific weapons, import certain energy supplies, or take sides in global disputes, New Delhi was repeatedly pushed in directions that harmed its independence. By openly rejecting this trend, Jaishankar made public what India had been slowly building for years. Strategic autonomy is not just a preference anymore, it is a red line. And this message was not shouted in anger. It was spoken with steady authority, the kind hardest to ignore. India's boldness also reflects a nation that has endured many storms and is no longer frightened by outside criticism. From standing firm on its energy cooperation with Russia to shaping its Indo-Pacific role without losing independence, New Delhi has shown it can handle world challenges with balance. Jaishankar's statement is only the most direct voice of this confidence. India has proved it can stand on its own and does not need validation from Washington, Brussels, or Beijing. Such confidence unsettles traditional power centers, especially when expressed with calm determination. Another layer of India's stand is the moral authority it draws from being a civilizational state. Unlike many newer nations, India carries thousands of years of history, culture, and survival through invasions and colonial rule. This deep memory guides its foreign policy and gives weight to its refusal to be treated as less. When Jaishankar declares India will not be dictated to, it is not only a minister's opinion, it is the voice of a civilization reclaiming its natural place in global order. That makes the message not only political, but cultural, which resonates deeply with both Indians and observers abroad. America's surprise at such words is not unusual. Washington has long relied on its power, sometimes openly and sometimes quietly, to influence even independent-minded allies. India's choice to challenge this openly and firmly disrupts long-held assumptions. It forces recognition that India is not a partner to be managed, but a power to be respected. This is not hostility toward America, but it does require change in expectations. For the first time in years, Washington sees that its words will not automatically shape India's actions, and that realization is unsettling. The decline of America's monopoly in world affairs, made obvious by Jaishankar's remarks, represents a major change in global politics. For much of the post-Cold War era, the United States stood unchallenged. It was not just the strongest military and the largest economy, but also the designer of global norms. Whether in trade, security, or human rights, Washington created the standard and others followed. But cracks have appeared for years, and India's assertive stance has brought this reality into the spotlight. By saying that the era of unquestioned narrative control is finished, Jaishankar expressed what many nations feel but hesitate to admit, that one power's monopoly no longer fits the 21st century world. America's dominance rested on two foundations: its military power and its ideological influence. Its ability to project force across the globe gave it unmatched control, while the appeal of liberal democracy gave many nations a model to copy. But both pillars have weakened. Militarily, the U.S. is stretched thin across Europe, Asia, and the Middle East. Economically, its lead is shrinking as China grows, Europe stabilizes, and India rises on its own path. Ideologically, the glow of American exceptionalism has faded as domestic division, inequality, and unrest weaken its credibility. Against this backdrop, Jaishankar's words not only challenge U.S. leadership, but confirm a multipolar world is here. India's message is not about replacing one monopoly with another. It is about rejecting monopoly itself. By refusing narratives written in Washington, New Delhi defends a principle that power must be shared, voices must be many, and global decisions must come from consensus, not domination. This unsettles American policymakers who long assumed that even if nations complained, they would eventually yield to U.S. priorities. The clarity of India's position destroys those assumptions. It proves that compliance is no longer guaranteed and that countries with their own size, economy, culture, and strategy will shape policies in their favor. The symbolic weight of this cannot be understated. For years, debates on multipolarity were seen as academic or distant ideas. Now they are practical and visible in the choices of nations that refuse to accept a single center of power. India's decision to continue buying oil from Russia, despite objections, or its policy of engaging with multiple blocs without dependence on one group, are real examples of this shift. These are not symbolic acts of defiance. They are deliberate choices that show the monopoly has already broken. Jaishankar's words are simply the open confirmation of this truth. The reaction in Washington showed how deeply it had grown used to dominance. The shock, the efforts to downplay India's remarks, and even the disbelief reveal the discomfort of a power meeting limits. But this unease is not limited to the U.S.-India dynamic. It is echoed in Africa, Asia, and Latin America, where many countries are also asserting independence, rejecting foreign lectures, and following their own priorities instead of imposed ones. The difference with India is scale and influence. Its voice is too large to ignore. When Jaishankar speaks of ending monopoly, it is not only a future wish, it is the reality already unfolding. The erosion of America's monopoly does not mean the U.S. has lost importance. It remains a major power with enormous resources and reach. But the era when its word defined every boundary is over. What Jaishankar's statement highlights is that the U.S. is now one of many power centers, and its dominance must give way to negotiation. The end of monopoly is not an Indian demand, but the new law of international politics, one that will define this century. Respect and sovereignty are at the heart of Jaishankar's message. His latest statements prove that for India, these principles cannot be compromised. For too long, the global order worked on a hierarchy where some powers thought they could dictate choices to others. India's long history of colonization has made it painfully aware of the danger of giving up sovereignty. That memory has created an unshakable resolve. Never again will India allow its independence to be surrendered under outside pressure. Jaishankar's demand for respect was not symbolic. It was a clear reminder that any nation seeking ties with India must treat it as an equal, never limiting its freedom of choice. Respect in world politics is not about smiling photos at summits or warm greetings at meetings. It is about acknowledging each other's needs, history, and realities. India has long received one-sided lectures, especially from the West. Whether on energy, defense, or trade, many expected India to eventually submit, and when it did not, the tone grew patronizing. Jaishankar rejects this completely, putting sovereignty as a red line and respect as the condition for real partnership. India is laying down rules that leave no room for condescension. Any relationship that ignores India's right to make decisions is not partnership, but hidden hierarchy. And India has made clear it will not tolerate this anymore. This demand for respect also flows from India's democratic identity. As the largest democracy on earth, India has its own moral authority, which cannot be dismissed. When Western nations speak of defending democracy, India itself proves that democracy is not a Western monopoly. Its diversity, scale, and resilience surpass many older democracies. Yet it is often judged by selective standards that ignore its unique reality. Jaishankar's stress on sovereignty is also a warning. No outside power has the right to define what Indian democracy should look like. Respecting India means accepting its own model of democracy, not imposing foreign versions. In foreign affairs, sovereignty means freedom to choose. This is why India's decisions unsettle others. Whether it is energy with Russia, ties with multiple groups, or refusal to join tight alliances, India acts only in line with its interests. This is not rebellion, but responsibility, the maturity of a rising power charting its own path. Those who respect India must accept that it will never trade its independence for others' plans. Jaishankar's clarity signals one permanent truth: India's sovereignty is eternal, while alliances are only temporary. This focus on respect also signals a shift in how India sees itself. It no longer moves cautiously like a smaller power surrounded by stronger states. Instead, it steps forward as a civilizational force built on thousands of years of history and fueled by modern growth. A nation with this weight does not beg for recognition. It naturally commands it. Respect here is not about kind words or ceremony. It is about placing India where it rightfully belongs, as a decisive force shaping the world's future. Any country that ignores this truth risks losing one of the most valuable partnerships of our time. Jaishankar's statement is therefore both a caution and an offer. Accept India's sovereignty and gain a partner of huge importance. Dismiss it and lose an opportunity that cannot be replaced. What makes this message striking is not anger, but certainty. Jaishankar's tone was calm, not aggressive, but it carried complete confidence. And that confidence is not only his own, It reflects the voice of a nation that will never again let its independence be reduced. By putting sovereignty and respect at the foundation, India has redrawn how the world must deal with it. Even the most powerful nations must now take this into account, and that changes the global rules of engagement. The rise of multipolarity is no longer a theory in research papers. It is happening in front of us, shaping trade, security, and alliances. Jaishankar's words captured this reality with clarity. For decades, the global order was led by one or two superpowers. The Cold War created two poles, the US and the Soviet Union. After the Soviet Union collapsed, the so-called unipolar era began, dominated by America. But that chapter has ended. A new multipolar balance is already forming. India's call for autonomy, equality, and independent choices is both a result of this change and one of the forces driving it. By declaring that no single capital can dictate the world's direction, Jaishankar has placed India firmly at the center of this rising multipolar system. Multipolarity means no one country sets all the rules. Influence is shared across many players, each with its own power and goals. America is still strong, but no longer unrivaled. China has become a major competitor. The European Union, despite internal divisions, holds weight in trade and regulations. Russia, though under strain, remains central in energy and security. Alongside them, nations like Brazil, South Africa, and regional blocs are pushing for more influence. This new order is being built day by day, and India is shaping it not with force, but with principles. Its voice carries weight because it combines history, democracy, and scale. Its choices are its own, not borrowed. That makes India one of the strongest poles of this century that no one can overlook. India's role is especially important because it links different parts of the world, east and west, north and south, while refusing to be absorbed into any one camp. Jaishankar's statement reflects this special position. India will not simply pick sides. It will claim its own place in a system with many centers of power. And this rise of multipolarity is not just about balance of military or economic weight. It is also about balance of stories. For too long, globalization, democracy, and progress have been explained mainly from a Western lens, with assumptions about what path others should take. Multipolarity breaks this pattern by letting diverse voices shape the global narrative. India, with its democratic diversity, cultural depth, and economic scale, offers a model that differs both from Western liberalism and authoritarian centralism. Jaishankar's words insist that this variety of paths must be respected and that no single ideology has the right to dominate. In this sense, multipolarity is not only political, but intellectual. It marks the end of ideological monopolies. The effects of this shift are already visible. Trade is spreading out as nations look beyond reliance on a single power. Security groups are becoming more flexible, with countries cooperating on shared issues without joining rigid alliances. Global institutions from the UN to the World Bank are under pressure to reform, as emerging powers demand a voice that reflects their true weight. India's campaign for reform of the UN Security Council fits perfectly into this vision. The older order that locked authority in the hands of a few no longer matches today's spread of power. Jaishankar's words make clear that India will keep pressing for change until these reforms are real. What unsettles Washington and other long-dominant capitals is the speed of this transformation. The belief that the unipolar age would last forever has collapsed. The recognition that America's dominance is shrinking has come faster than many predicted. By speaking openly of this reality, India has accelerated the shift, adding diplomatic weight to a trend already underway. It is one thing for academics or smaller nations to talk about multipolarity. It is quite another when a rising power like India declares it as the new order. This does not mean a multipolar world will be free of difficulties. Competing interests, shifting partnerships, and the absence of one single stabilizing force can bring uncertainty. But it does mean that no country will again enjoy unchecked control. In Jaishankar's view, multipolarity is not a danger, but an opportunity. It creates space for nations like India to pursue their interests without being forced into smaller roles. It makes room for balance, dialogue, and cooperation that reflect global diversity. Most importantly, it ends the illusion that one nation can or should play the world's policeman. The growth of multipolarity is both the result of history and a deliberate choice by countries determined to protect their sovereignty. By voicing this firmly and without hostility, India has placed itself among the key builders of this new order, ensuring that multipolarity will not be temporary, but the defining feature of the 21st century. India as an equal partner is not just a diplomatic request, it is the central principle of its foreign policy today, and Jaishankar's words make that point with unmistakable clarity. For decades, international partnerships often hid a hierarchy rather than equality. The stronger nations led the talks, and the weaker ones were expected to follow, often at the cost of their own interests. India has now said clearly that this is no longer acceptable. If partnerships are to last, they must be built on real mutual respect, not instructions disguised as cooperation. This marks a change in India's style, from careful and accommodating to confident and assertive. It reshapes how global powers must approach New Delhi. The call for equality comes from India's unique path. With the largest democratic population, one of the fastest growing economies, and a location that connects continents, India holds a weight that cannot be reduced to a supporting role. Yet for much of recent history, many Western nations treated it as a state that needed persuasion, guidance, or pressure to fall in line. The idea was that India mattered, but not decisively. By insisting on equality, Jaishankar has overturned that belief. India is not asking for acknowledgement. It is declaring that it already stands at the heart of global order. Any partnership that ignores this truth lacks credibility. At its core, equality is about safeguarding sovereignty. Partnerships built on hierarchy always bring pressure to give up independence, as the stronger side assumes it can draw the limits for the weaker. India has faced such pressure in areas from defense purchases to foreign policy choices. By rejecting it, India is making clear that cooperation cannot mean coercion, and alignment cannot mean submission. A true partnership respects differences, even when interests do not match completely. That is why Jaishankar emphasizes that India will engage with the world on its own terms, and others must adjust to that. India's style of building ties also reflects its multipolar vision. In such a world, equality is not optional but essential. No power can dictate without resistance. India proves this by working with multiple groups at once, strengthening ties with the United States in defense and technology, working with Russia on energy and security, expanding trade with developing countries, and taking an active role in the Quad and the G20. Each effort is based on shared benefit, not subordination. Jaishankar's words remind us that India does not see partnerships as loyalty to one camp, but as cooperation between equals. This flexibility makes India both valuable and challenging as a partner because it rejects the old style of alignment. The insistence on equality also carries a quiet warning to those who expect India to eventually fall in line. The idea that closeness with Washington would automatically bring compliance has been disproven again and again. Whether keeping energy trade with Russia, refusing to repeat Western positions on conflicts, or pushing for institutional reform, India has shown its voice will remain independent. This independence is not hostility, it is a demand for recognition that India's interests matter as much as anyone else's. The equal partnership India seeks is not shallow or temporary. It is a permanent shift. It challenges the old system and insists on a fairer model where cooperation lasts because it is balanced. Jaishankar's stand also reflects India's faith in its own future, a nation on track to become one of the top 3 economies in the next decade, with a young population, advanced technology, and rising military capacity, will no longer settle for symbolic inclusion. Equality is not a favor others can grant. It is a reality they must accept. This unsettles those who are used to dominance, but inspires those who want a fairer world. India as an equal partner is not just a slogan. It is already visible in trade, diplomacy, and security across the globe. Jai Shankar's words underline that this principle is firm and non-negotiable, and any partnership that fails to respect it will struggle to survive in the years ahead.